Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour. I am your host and guide, Mr. Crispy, speaking to you through uncanny frequencies and sharing with you stories strange, fascinating, and terrifying. The views and opinions expressed on air are solely those of the speaker. The Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour is an entertainment program, and any similarities to any person living or dead, or any place or events, are entirely coincidental. The Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour was created except as indicated by Matt Henshaw. Listener discretion is advised. And now, take Mr. Crispy's moldering hand in yours, ignore that tacky fluid under my nails, and join me for the Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour.
Greetings! You've reached Mr. Crispy's Telecommunications Portal. New voice messages will be transmitted every fortnight at this number. I found you in the soil cloister, laying and dreaming for 100 eons. Now awakening to a new life, you stand, shroud falling, revealing, figure swaying in a dying ballet, her mouth rioting away, tongue thousand blooming sores. Shining blades of hex speech pierce and break my heart, shattering as glass shatters glass. I embrace the terrible goddess as she takes hold the reins of firmament. I find myself changing. Radical mutations grow, spread over and inside me. My mind goes mycorrhizal, feeling too much. The dendrite light blinds to static red, and she emerges wearing painful black, writhing worm suit. The skeleton under the livid, bruised skin was a catastrophe, tragically broken, shaping the body into something hardly resembling the playful son, the star high school quarterback, the desired lover, the devoted parent it once was. 6-armed surgeons surge into the blood-stained battlefield. It is night, but they wear night vision contact lenses that lend their visages an even more insectile appearance. With their muscular primary arms, they hoist a body up, leaking all manner of viscera, while with their lower stalks, they gather the scalpels, saws, and other surgical instruments to perform their messy work. With one of their baby mid-arms, they prepare the patient for the initial incisions. With the other, they polish the metal gleaming and make the first cut. Red bloom flower life rises and spills, the body's cup runneth over, and its eyes gibber and tongue rolls nonsensically. Deeper into the wound, the surgeon digs, liver, kidneys, and other organs slipping, pulsing, slowing. Still deeper, there, nestled behind the air sacs, a green gleam shines in the ordnance lightning flash. With a calipered fork, a lower stalk leg grabs the prize and lifts it out. The soldier sighs and smiles as the gem is extracted, all their organs seizing and then resuming their normal rhythms. The gem is deposited into a black cube, sealed, and delivered to the prime for evaluation and inspection. He raised the tankard to his chapped lips and swallowed the last of his suds with a hearty smack and a rumbling belch. He sat the vessel down on the pine-top bar and summoned the barkeep to keep the brew flowing. He turned on his stool and fixed his gaze on me. Although I had seen him down 2 drinks previously, his eyes shone with the sobriety of a judge. The tavern began to take on a thickness, as though everything was projected upon a screen of smoke. The pool table, jukebox, and empty foretops suspended mid-air and slightly floating. "Now watch my dagger make magic," he says, revealing a blade so sharp even looking at it leaves a wound. He sticks it into his thigh and slices down to his knee. Light seeps out, running down his pant leg, pooling luminescence on the smoky floor. He wheeze laughs, one silver tooth glinting off the new light source. "Guess you didn't see that one coming," he says, as he goes to work on the other leg. I sit dumbfounded by this, as he stands, his head nearly hitting the ceiling. "And now my hungry hollow needs sustenance," he murmurs, unbuttoning his flannel shirt. Rancid thoughts bloom decay, rot tower pierce galactic sky, spaceway paved with humanity's bones. We can only plead and scream why. Echoing madness in mirror wall mind, needle teeth rend and tear my soul. Portal looks down in an infinite pit, my suffering just not enough to pay the toll. A couple sits on a bench, both smiling. The man holds an infant so small, too small, in his arms. I meet his eyes, and then I hear a series of pops. The baby is a rapidly deflating balloon, blood spurting onto the couple who blink and maintain their smiles. A black cloud passes over the sun, turning the afternoon to twilight. The leaking air from the infant makes a high whistling sound like tea boiling. The smiles spread wider and wider across the couple's faces, rictuses eventually bisecting their heads to a puppet-like appearance. Their eyes blink again and then stare at you, judging you. The woman returns the pin to her purse. They then stand as one, the still impossibly deflating baby falling to the ground where a colony of ants make their approach, drawn by the cotton candy scent that fills the air. The couple walk away, not toward you, but still staring at you with their puppet, malicious smiles. Toby lives in an alley behind a dilapidated bowling center in the middle of Olean County. The alley is quiet except for Tuesdays and Fridays, when the bowling center is open. Even then, it is only patronized by half a dozen people, drunk Iraq War veterans who like Michelob Light and wear gold chains over their too-tight Journey t-shirts. Toby works at a pet supply shop, mainly handling the crickets, locusts, and other aphids that provide sustenance to the menagerie of reptiles and amphibians also sold in the store. He has an odd gait due to a bike incident when he was a teenager, so he side shuffles when summoned by the bell. He wears cargo shorts, urine-stained, with pockets full of teeth and other filth he collects in the alleyway. Any crickets that don't go to the animals, he finds an excellent snack, but he mainly eats fish from a nearby creek. The oilier, the better. The phosphorescent light burned with an intensity that washed out nearly every feature of the singer as she walked out onto the stage. Once the audience blinked away their temporary blindness, they could only make out her lips. Red lips suspended over an impossibly slender figure wearing a blue sequined gown that had its own luminescence. She commenced, her voice full of power, the tones ringing like church bells heralding the second coming. As her singing continued, the light shifted from white to green, revealing her broken, wasted form, singing not only her damnation, but every person's listening to her abominable hymn. Panic drove him down the stairs, rushing like a river to the ground floor. He came to the door to the alleyway and depressed the bar and pushed. The air popped, and as the door creaked open, an inky void met his eyes. Fear of what he had just seen propelled him into the darkness under his feet. The ground felt less substantial, as though he was sinking in fresh mud. Behind him he could hear the footfalls of the terrors he was escaping from, so he began to run. For some time he had lost all bearings of where he was. Gray balls of luminescence fell like snow from the sky, revealing only the shapes of walls, structures, and detritus that he scrambled to avoid.
Inter-office romance. It was a flash of light that first signaled my desire's presence to me one afternoon at Young and Plurgson's. I was wrapping up reporting for the day when a diamond of light appeared on my monitor, blinding me momentarily. Scowling and blinking, I looked around my office for the source. Finding none, I happened to look out of my window, across the street at the Taxington building where I saw her. Dark medium-length hair and a modest business-casual outfit that enhanced her beauty. She had on her wrist a gold watch, the likely culprit for the shining light, but that was the least of what I had noticed. What I had noticed was my quickened pulse, my blush at our met gazes, and just how lustful my look clearly was, even from a distance. The moment passed in time, but remained present in my heart for days and weeks that followed. My desire visited me in dreams. In one, she was scantily attired in furs bearing a broadsword. She called me Lord Donaton, and that I should smite our enemies with its blade. I awoke from that one as I was to take her in my arms. In another dream, she was sitting next to me on a couch with an orange dress on. We were at a party and she was telling me something personal, something vulnerable, and I put my hand on her thigh just before waking up, wishing we had continued talking. In the dream I had a couple of nights ago, she had on a worn terry cloth robe that revealed just enough to arouse. She looked at me with sparkling hazel eyes, and while the words she spoke were a denial of some request I made, they became more open to the idea, and she moved closer to me, her body brushing against my arm as she leaned down, now agreeing to my request, sealing the covenant with her lips as my alarm went off to start another workday. All this time in the afternoons I would see her working away, filing papers, making copies, the usual humdrum of an office secretary. Her face bore the usual expression of work, thinking of 100 other things that were not within the four walls of her office. I am sure I looked the same to her, another drone doing their work for the boss. But she would have seen something more on my face, especially when I looked at her. My resolve increasing as the days and weeks went on, to learn her name, to go to her and get to know her better, to lay the groundwork for the fulfillment of my fantasies of her. I could be patient for that, which was so nebulous and largely only in the domain of my sleeping hours, but the time was drawing nigh for me to make my introductions. At last my words were right in my head, and I had reached the point where I was going to do it. Today, I was going to walk across the street to the Taxington building, ascend to the 6th floor, and meet my destiny, my desire, my love. The weather was pleasant for early April, and after eating my lunch and confirming she was at her desk across the street, I made my way down the elevator. I strode through the lobby and out the revolving glass door to the bustling sidewalk. Businessmen and women made their way to their respective offices,
and I waited for a break in traffic before crossing Kloss Avenue. The doors to the Taxington building were smoky glass accented with brass handles. I hadn't noticed before how austere the building was. Indeed, I had been so focused on my work at Young & Plurkson's for my 4-year tenure with them that the surroundings had largely faded into the background of my days. The door creaked on its hinge as I opened it and stepped into the lobby. The sounds of Kloss Avenue were immediately subdued when the door shut, and replacing the street noise was a faint sound of static, as if I had tuned into a dead television channel. There was also a repetitive whir of some kind of machine, punctuated by a percussive bang at odd intervals. The first of these made me jump with alarm, and I wondered what in the devil its source was. The floor was tiled in alternating red, black, and white porcelain, which clicked with every step of my shoes on its surface. The receptionist, sitting at a large mahogany desk, had their back to me as I walked to the bank of elevators. The building seemed to be from an older time, and the elevators too had the look of Art Deco to them. Instead of digital readouts, a dial indicated what floor the cars were currently on, and I depressed a down button to send one to me, to take me to my desired one. As it descended, I looked at the placard that told me about the office holders. Thomas Kyle, CSW, Plate Holdings and Investments, and several empty slots. The 6th floor sign read the Fields Corporation, and a bell sounded as the elevator doors slowly opened. I stepped in and made out the faded number 6 button and pressed it. The doors closed slowly, and the incandescent bulb above me slightly dimmed as the car shuddered and began to ascend. I looked at the vertical gap as I passed by each floor on my way up. The time between floors 2 through 4 were uniform, but as the elevator passed the 4th floor, time seemed to dilate. Maybe it was just my nerves as I continued to rehearse my opening salvo. "I'm Donald from across the street, and I think you're beautiful," I repeated to myself. The vertical line went bright as though past a fluorescent light bar, and the elevator made something of a moaning sigh as the dial reached 6 and the final bell rang. The doors opened, and I was surprised to see a hallway full of old wood paneling and frosted glass. I took a moment to note my bearings relative to Young & Plurkson's and determined that I probably needed to go 5 to 7 doors down on my right to find her office. I walked a little ways, this floor linoleum and looking like it had been months since its last cleaning. One of the doors, the class reading Horn & Sons, was slightly ajar, and I looked in. The lights were off, but light shone in through the windows enough to see that it was abandoned. It did confirm that I was on the right track, the office opposite being a few doors down from my own office. I stood straighter, instilling myself with the confidence to introduce myself to the beauty across. I came to the door which read, "The Fields Corporation, Files," and turned the burnished knob. The door jamb clicked and released, and a sound like sealed air came as the door opened. From within, I could hear the sounds of a copier and someone typing as though on an old typewriter. The lights above were not dim, but also impossible to determine the source of the light. It was cold, much colder than the hallway. There was a blind drawn down from the window, so the natural light was subdued. I entered, clearing my throat to announce my presence, and saw sitting at the desk a hunched old man, face obscured, who was indeed clicking keys at a typewriter of some vintage. He reached the end of the page and drew the carriage back with a palsied hand. Motion drew my attention away, and my heart beat faster, sure that I was about to see the face of my desired one. What I encountered was a small cyclone of paper, of various sizes and colors, swirling to a height approximately that of the woman I had been dreaming of. I stood perplexed and noticed a shadow against the wall that definitely had her feminine form. The pages fluttered as they spun around, sounding like light and mirthless laughter. A sound like far-off thunder sounded, and I looked back at where the old man had been typing. The chair was now empty save for his dark blue suit jacket. I took the page from the typewriter that had this written on it.
Will you not, Lord Donaton, take this broadsword and smite our enemies with it? How will I know them, Empress? By their lack of faces, Lord Donaton, she grinned, and revealed her sinuous body to him under her robes. Welcome to the Fields Corporation, Donald. We have been watching you with interest for some time now across the way. Now that the scales have been dropped from your eyes, look upon the world anew and join us in our mission.
I shook my head, now thoroughly confused, and made my way to the window. I opened the blind and looked across at my building into my office, where I saw myself sitting at my desk, being approached by an old man and a woman, both holding daggers of some kind. They raised them already dripping with gore, and I yelled involuntarily and impotently to stop. The glass then blinked to black, and the lights in the office flickered. A piece of still circulating paper flew into my hands, a flyer for a furniture store named Emporium Crepuscular, and I fell to the floor as though struck by a heavy object. Groaning, I felt the lump forming on the back of my head as I looked up at the still flickering light of the office. The static sound I had heard in the lobby of the Taxington building is louder now, along with a murmuring of a dozen or so voices. I shakily stand wiping dust off of my blue suit pants. I take my jacket from the chair and make my way out of the office. Taking the elevator back down to the lobby, I am unsettled but not panicked by the other occupants whose backs are either to me or whose faces are otherwise obscured and invisible to me. In the lobby, the tiles on the floor had bloomed into iridescent bulbs, appearing as though they were balloons about to burst. I exit the Taxington building to streets that are silent save for the static sound. A boy with a too-wide mouth smiles with too many rows of broken teeth at the corner before floating away into the technicolor red sky. Black lightning bursts in columns from the cracked sidewalk, joining together in skeletal webs several dozen feet in the air. The static sound grows louder as I approach and enter my building. The lobby is an abattoir, dozens of bodies stacked into piles 5 feet high. Limbs had been removed as though by an expert butcher, and the uniformity of the piles is at once impressive and revolting. My bare, cracked feet slosh through half an inch of gore as I make my way to the elevators. The air hums with the rotten hymns of horseflies feasting on the massacre. I get out on my floor, and on the ground lays a broadsword, a piece of typewritten paper impaled upon it. I pick it up with old, palsied hands, and it reads,
I'm Patty, Donald. It's nice to meet you at last. I'd like you too, but not that way. You're a little too old for me. But now that we're talking about it, I can't help but think that if circumstances were a little different, we could get some coffee, chat a little, see where the evening takes us. Don't worry about the fire. It's part of the process.
I walk towards my office, and the static sound is now deafening. I open the door to my office and see my younger effigy sitting at my desk, muttering in some language thousands of eons dead, typing at an old typewriter with swirling paper for hands. I raise the sword over my head and begin to bring it down on my younger avatar, time slowing to a crawl, and the arc of my swing gradually coming to a stop. Across the street, the office of my desire is full of flames, not consuming anything, but watching as my own fluttering paper self burns to black carbon, typing, "I love you. I love you. I love you."
And now, zodiac oracles, missives from the denizens of zodiacal spaces. The diadem of 1,000 eyes. With my 457th eye, I spy a woman child of 7 or 8 years, standing in a market square, looking covetously at a tunic of sapphire blue. She asks the wearer if she may have a swatch, and the individual consents. At home, the woman child affixes the fabric to the wall where she sees it every morning while dressing. The texture and color indelibly imprint themselves on her young mind, and she is troubled by dreams uncanny and disturbing. As she ages, she becomes a politician who casts a deciding vote in favor of space exploration. Hundreds of years later, long after she has passed away, humanity encounters extraterrestrial life in the form of plankton growing under the seas of HJ 398, an otherwise unremarkable planet in an otherwise unremarkable galaxy. The plankton is the same color and texture as the swatch of fabric. Sisters Weird. Donna, the younger, plays cat's cradle with a skein of thread spun by a carpenter worm. It takes the shape of a fifth-dimensional hemicube, representing the rise and rule of the Jinklo Omnicrest in the coming 200 years. Meanwhile, Gabby, the elder, continues writing the book which will be known in 21st century European literature as a game changer for its portmanteau style, combining French and Czech language. I, Sally, the middle child and the one who speaks, can reveal that Jonathan Polk is the serial killer who has stumped New Orleans detectives for 15 years, having brutally slaughtered a dozen prostitutes. Upon arrest, Mr. Polk will confess to the killings and lead investigators to the sites where he disposed of the bodies. Miss Frances Bolone will be cited by the city for solving the case and bringing Jonathan to justice. He will be sentenced to death by lethal injection, which will be the last state execution performed before capital punishment is abolished in the United Federation of Sino-Brazilian States. The Horans emerged from their underground tunnels and began to crawl and pile on the surface. They consumed the lower insects, dividing and multiplying in geometric progression to hundreds, thousands, millions. They formed a writhing carpet that grew by inches, then feet, lifting me above the ground and consuming me, making me part of their greater hive colony as they proceeded to conquer all they covered. The abomination reclined, if a pile such as this could be said to be capable of reclining, half concealed by shadows. I shuddered at its revealed form, revolted to the point of sharp nausea. As it produced gibbering sounds that suggested a hideous lexicon, it shot forth from its undercarriage a triad of hard biologic-looking objects. In my mind, I recalled the astrogali, bones that connected mammalian shins to ankles, and the precursor of the common dye for pre-agricultural man. Its malicious role gave me the final motivation to drive me screaming away. Descending from the silver clouds were dozens of black ropes that made the air scream louder than me as I rode down the road. They touched the ground, excoriating the surface and causing explosions of soil and detritus that scratched and cut my arms and face. I pedaled faster, sparing a look behind me to see a menagerie of animals from a nearby zoo stampeding down the street. I yelled to my wife to pull off to a nearby house, and our tires ground against the gravel as the thundering herd approached. We hid behind a shrub, staring in wonder as the animals ran by, chased by the cyclones. It was hard not to think of these tornadoes as being alive, their will simply being to destroy. My wife came out from the shrubs too early because the animals were still streaming by. My breath was taken away as a pack of lions scooped her up in their wake, and I stared in dumbfounded shock as they began to tear her apart. Maybe a sacrifice in their feline minds to stop the storm from dropping more threads of chaos on the land. The horror was more than I could bear, the mane stained crimson with my wife's blood, a limb twitching from their feast. I shook as the tornadic tendrils continued along their way, and the sky blinked black. Anechoic corridors and hallways engulfed me in an inner maelstrom. To outside appearances, I seemed to be under attack from swarms of insects, swatting at them with intent. But in reality, the strikes and motions are entirely instinctual, not of my direct will. It is a violent dance directed by my seizing brain, struggling to free itself from the chaotic noise swirling between my neurons. The tonitic tones grow, cluster, and make new hideous harmonies that drive my nervous system to collapse. My breathing becomes erratic, my heart goes arrhythmic. My entire left side collapses, and I fall in a mad, gibbering pile as light bends, swirls, and breaks into consciousness-bursting radiance. The first hit was all taste, rush smoke and fungal earth. He cranked the stereo, neo-thrash providing an appropriate soundtrack to the light balls began to appear in his eyes. His bones felt bendable as the drug began to course through his bloodstream. Up and down his arms, rash bloomed in fractal red patterns. A not entirely unpleasant itch accompanied this, and he slid into the lukewarm tub water. His fingernails, then toenails, loosened and released, floating to the surface as his brain began to pulse against his skull. It was not a great batch, but it did press the sickness beyond arm's length, and he could at least float insensate to his problems for an hour before returning to his work to pay for the next fix.
Rebuke of the Cube Lord. Thomas sat waiting in the exam room, taupe walls and faux wood tiling on the floor. The exam chair was comfortable, with mirrored segments on the cushioned arm rests. The minutes ticked by, a welcome respite from the chores he had performed an hour ago. He began to feel himself sinking into the chair and fought against lethargy to remain alert. Voices indistinct and footsteps of an unknown number could be heard outside, along with a tuneless bit of music. He shook his head to clear the weariness, but the exam room had taken on a light not of the fluorescence above, but the flickering dusk of candle flame. His eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom, and the room had changed. Ahead of his exam chair were 4 chairs. They were empty, and they cast shadows on the walls, along with an out-of-focus strobing effect. Thomas wondered if this strobing effect was similar to the shimmering out-of-phase sensation he sometimes observed when he first awoke in the morning. The effect elongated the chairs and showed shadows of things sitting in them that were not visible otherwise. An electrical outlet at the opposite side of the room slowly began to pulse in an arrhythmic rate. The chair closest to him in the room burst into hoarse yellow flame, emanating a slight chill. The voices outside of the room sounded more excited now. Occasionally a word like time and harm would make its way through, but it was largely unmoored from the sane shackles of language. Percussively augmenting the insane babble was the sound of footsteps. However, their reverberations did not belie how many feet or how many owners of the feet were outside. It could have been 2, or it could have been 2002. In a blink, the room changed back to its normal appearance, and Thomas rubbed at his temples. Shortly thereafter, a knock sounded and the doctor came in. They identified themselves as Dr. Ofen, and Thomas felt the dis-ease of his dream melt away. "Okay, Thomas, I'm going to begin by testing your reflexes," Dr. Ofen said as they removed a small triangular hammer from the desk drawer. They wheeled their chair over to the exam chair, and Thomas rolled up his pant leg. "This won't hurt a bit," Dr. Ofen smiled, and they lightly struck the hammer against Thomas's knee. His leg remained motionless, though. Dr. Ofen's expression neutralized, and they struck Thomas's leg again without response. Interesting," Dr. Ofen said softly as they made some notes on their clipboard. "I would like to try something else," they said, and they depressed a button on the desk that faded the lights down to a gloom similar to the one Thomas had experienced while he dozed. The lights were now dim enough that Dr. Ofen's features were obscured in shadows. Again, they struck the hammer with a little more force against Thomas's leg. Still no response. Thomas stared ahead and noted the far wall was again seeming to pulse as though alive. "Dr. Ofen," Thomas started, but Dr. Ofen held up a finger to indicate he not speak. "Please relax, Thomas, and complete silence is needed for the next portion of the exam." The 4 chairs again indicated that, based on the shadows, there was an audience to this unorthodox test, though there was no one visibly sitting in them. As he sat, he noticed from the wall of the exam room a pale circular disk began to glow. The circle grew and shrunk by degrees, but eventually settled into the size of a dinner plate. Now, in addition to the tapping, the doctor began to softly hum a discordant melody, unsettling and containing overtones that made Thomas feel weak and suggestible. The disc slowly slid out of the wall, a milky luminescence creating a smoky haze around the object. The doctor continued to tap, while what was clearly a hat now sat against the wall as though hanging on a hook. The wall itself now had what appeared to be other bubbles bulging out, birthing inscrutable things, black on black, but harboring a menacing aspect. Thomas was now feeling more anxious while also paralyzed and unable to speak. Following the hat from the wall was a slowly rotating cube, which was the source of the light that now seeped from the aperture. The hat remained completely still even as the cube tumbled and turned its way out of the wall. Even while rotating, the cube bore on its face 3 dots above and 3 dots below a solid black line. Though it was not a face, it did seem to scrutinize Thomas with disdain. as if he was a lower life form. Further emerging from the wall, the torso was bedecked in a three-piece suit, an almost painful white shirt under a black jacket. On its lapel, it bore a circular talisman that glowed a deep red. Its black tie swarmed with nebulae and novae, the cosmic flux overwhelming Thomas's addled mind. Dr. Ofen was now huddled on their stool. They stopped hammering Thomas's leg and took to striking their own face with the small hammer. A bruise deepened, and their face began to cave in as though it was made of clay. Watery blood began to flow from their broken nose, and the bruises became welts that wept serum that resembled rotten egg albumin. They also seemed to collapse into their clothes, becoming less substantial with every strike. They sighed softly as their mouth came apart, and teeth began to hit the floor with a soft sound like hail hitting felt. Saliva splashed cool against Thomas's face as the hammering went on, and he noted in their ruined mouth a glowing orchid appeared to bloom. The doctor's breathing was labored and wet, but still they hammered away. Now an eye, dropping from its wrecked socket, hit the wall with a wet splat, sliding down to the floor where it melted into a puddle of vitreous liquid. Against the wall, standing 7 feet tall, the being with the rotating cube head was standing, seeming to stare impassively at the scene in front of him. Now slightly visible, non-Euclidean entities slid and sat in the chairs. One had 4 mouths at different corners of its head, snapping and clattering its hundreds of needle-like teeth together, making a sound like a warped harp and an old car engine turning over. In another chair sat a small figure of about 3 feet tall, appearing to be a toddler, but its head was obscured by a black veil. Purple smoke leaked out of its hands, curling and dissipating in the air. Thomas could smell something foul begin to fill the room. In the chair closest to Thomas, a beetle with hundreds of small rolling eyes sat, wriggling its dozens of hooked legs and emitting a high whistle like a boiling tea kettle. In the 4th chair, a figure could just be made out that appeared to be made of gelatinous static. The image would disappear and reappear at random, lines of interference traveling over and through it. The figure with the cube for a head stepped forward and raised a cane beset with an emerald-eyed crab. It pointed the cane at Dr. Ofen, who halted their hammering and crumpled to the ground as though they were a marionette whose strings had been cut. From within Thomas's head, a continental voice spoke.
"We are the Cube Lord, and we have assembled here to evaluate you for your insolence and unwillingness to comply with our commands. When we visited you 10 cycles ago, it was made clear that you were to take our direction and make manifest the messages that we transmitted to you. In this, you have failed. We will now evaluate whether there is anything that can be done to tune you to more complete compliance, or whether you should be terminated."
At this, the toddler-like creature crawled down to the floor and gathered the teeth up, placing them into a rectangular device. The toddler began to shake the device, the teeth inside rattling. Thomas sat silent, terrified and confused.
"Begin the evaluation,"
Cube Lord commanded, and the device began to glow and oscillate between green and blue, as the clacking within turned into a sound like fleshy, fat hands clapping. After a few moments, the device remained a steady sapphire and sounded a tone.
Very well,
the Cube Lord said, as the toddler creature slank back to its chair, making a hiccuping chortle as it sat. Thomas's feet felt as though they were soaking in warm acid, pinpricks of extraordinary pain flowing under his toenails.
Glickpole, report your observations,
the Cube Lord said, and the beetle's tea-kettle whistle was joined by a series of clicks. Against the wall, a series of glyphs began to ooze out, winking and shifting into other characters.
We concur, Glickpole,
said the Cube Lord. The warm acid sensation was now rising up Thomas's legs, and he felt the knee that had been tapped growing bulbous and hot. He tried to protest, but his tongue couldn't move, and he could only make a piteous whine.
Your descent is most displeasing,
said the Cube Lord,
and will no longer be tolerated.
At this, a tight vice-like force held Thomas completely still, and his whine ceased with an audible click like a radio being turned off. Thomas then felt his body lift from the chair, and he was floating above it a few centimeters. The feeling of floating was confirmed as Thomas somehow saw himself floating over the chair, his vision turning, flipping, then doubling. One view was from his body's seated perspective, the other of his body from the perspective of the figure, which was continuing to flicker in and out of phase. As the figure settled into stasis, he noted with terror that his eyes were projected onto the interference vertically instead of horizontally. Thomas screamed in his mind, but no sound came.
Baby,
spoke the Cube Lord. The syllables after baby, a combination of sine waves, a sonic boom, and the tortured dying screams of Thomas's mother.
This subject is yours to rectify.
At this, the small toddler-like being oozed down from the chair and made its way, half walking and half crawling, to the floating body of Thomas. As it approached, Dr. Ofen began to scream and tear at their hair, ripping it out by bloody roots and stuffing it into their broken mouth. From his multiple vantage points, Thomas could see the small entity make its way towards his body, leaving behind it a trail of rotting lichen which bloomed blue, red, and then a fizzing black. Under its veil, the visage of the thing shifted, and Thomas could feel every muscle in his body tighten and cramp in terror. As it got closer, Thomas's body descended back into the exam chair. The awful small thing seemed to contain a vastness, and Thomas had the mad thought that if the veil parted even a little, himself, the room, and the whole world might have been sucked into whatever inhospitable void lurked where its face ought to be. When the veiled entity finally made contact with the exam chair, Thomas could feel the marrow in his bones become hotter. He even thought he could hear cochlear fluid bubbling in his ears, steam rising inside his body, making his organs hot. Baby reached one hand out to Thomas's leg, which was now expanding like a balloon, filled with who knows what festering rot. The rot sang to him, a hymn of longing freedom, as though it had waited eons in captivity. The rot took on a sentience that spoke to Thomas's consciousness. "Just wait," it suggested. "Just wait." The skin split under the pressure, and black worms with triangular heads began to seep out. One of the worms turned its head to face Thomas, mouth full of dripping needle teeth. It spoke to him in a voice that sounded like a hysterical preacher.
Holy, 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 that is how your babes, your spawns, your maggots will feel upon receiving our sacramental anointing. Rejoice, for that young, squirming, mewling thing in their crib can start on the left path with toddling feet and palms. We entreat you to gather your family and make haste to our fine hive temple. The Ordo and its fraternity extend an invitation to witness and participate in one of our most dramatic and esoteric rites, the Baptismus Bile. Huddled together in wooden pews, we begin with a humming hymn of supplication to our most winged Lord, setting the mood for the treats to come. Then the chalice of our soured milk, transmogrified through rituals too secret to speak of here, shall be passed among the larvae, slaking their thirst. Now the ritual begins. Baby speaks the words thanking our great Lord for the decadent age to come. Then mother and father rise, bringing child with them to the reflecting pool. Gently, gently, they pass the child to the frater. Cradled over the pool, Frater Pollynux speaks softly a prayer while dipping the child's head in the water, cleansing it of the foul pollutants of this world. Head shining and bare, the babe is set upon the altar. Another song is sweetly sung, the penultimate movement of this dramatic act. Sister Milfrus then appears. She is resplendent in her wings of silver thread, her carapace a shining glory reflecting and refracting the light coming in through our stained glass. Rising from the basement of the temple on a trap door, accompanied by the soft susurrus of hemp rope on steel, she spins and speaks in a song that will drive the congregation to weep in appreciation. Then, turning to the child, she begins her dance, bending, kneeling, spinning, contorting herself into lovely, awful shapes. Then, the miracle, the glorious gift is about to be given. Her abdomen contracts and contorts, and the syllables of her song descend into guttural gasps and moans. Her throat constricts and shivers as the gift rises from torso to neck. There are some who, witnessing such a feat, may have tumescence to discreetly tend to. No worries, it is good and right to do so. Finally, mouth opening, the cascading gift is revealed to all. A geyser, a fountain of heavenly bile, shoots forth with an inhuman force, coating the child in the munt. The torrent continues until every inch of the child, altar, and freighter is dripping with the green wonder. Oh, blessed be, to witness such a glorious sight! It is not uncommon for the congregation to be so moved as to contribute to the torrent. So marked, the child, now a protected maggot, is rehoisted by the frater and handed back to the appreciative parents, who return to their pews as the congregation sings a final hymn of thanks, and as Sister Milfrus descends back into our cellar. And as the sun shines on us all, so sing we all. The new day is dawning. All hail, hail Revola, hallelujah, Nema Diptera.
Thomas stood in abject horror, blood vessels in his left eye rupturing, making the scala red. Glickpole excitedly clicked as more of the glyphs on the wall began to coalesce and glow a livid red. Outside of any rational explanation, Thomas looked down at his hands, which had developed a palsy, and his right pinky fingernail began to grow covered in a yellow fungus that curled into a point.
It is working. Your will is submitting, the Cube Lord spoke. Begin the transmission!
It bellowed as Dr. Ofen exploded in a wet hiccup of gore. Baby laughed, and Thomas's mind finally broke completely. Panting, he reached down his hand with the elongated pinky finger to the floor. He scratched, gently at first, and then with more force, making a mark like chalk of his fungal nail.
Acceptable,
said the Cube Lord as Thomas made his marks on the room. Time passed, eventually the strange denizens wavering out of view, but their shadows continued to pulse. Thomas, lost in an impossible complex of insanity, scratched and wrote on first one tile, then another. When the finger would not suffice, he bit the tip of one of his fingers off, blood becoming black ink that scrawled figures and strings of absurd nonsense into an indecipherable muck. Thomas was not aware when the assistant knocked on the door and screamed for security. Thomas was not aware of being dragged away by the police, subdued by a tranquilizer as he was loaded into a waiting ambulance. Thomas was not aware of the medic he headbutted, and Thomas was not aware when he grabbed a scalpel and began to carve more symbols into the medic, into the bed, and into his own foot. Sweat blooming and dripping from his manic face, Thomas was not aware of the ambulance careening off of the highway and bursting into flames. He continued to receive the transmission and continued to dutifully transcribe that message, even as his flesh began to blacken, blister, burn, and fall away. The Cube Lord's rebuke was complete.
With a crack and tear of gingiva, I extracted a third tooth, dropping it into the sink with the other two. The blood flowed after, syrup thick, clots splattering wetly on porcelain. My face was red from the exertion, my hands trembling from the effort. But that voice is still echoing in my brain, telling me awful things, awful things. The only way to make it stop is to remove the transmitters, that is, the first 3 teeth I've removed. Time for number 4. I return to my righteous work. Hoisted above her head, the dread scabbard whispered about in legend as Lethang's blade pulsed and glowed with an eerie milky green luminescence. Besides its psychic connection to its bearer, safeguarding them from its effects, the blade consisted of uncountable gossamer serrated wires rigidly bound to the holster through the mad magician's Buth and Lethang's curse. These wires vibrate at a frequency such that any sentient being within 5 meters is struck immediately insane and immobile. Upon striking its victim, the blade separates the very bonds between molecules, cleaving them into thin sheets. These sheets fly like flesh kites upon the gentlest of breezes, the sound of air passing through them a terminal scream. Within, delicate organ pulsed and pushed. Process fluid flows into tight channels, pressed on by processes under subconscious control. I feel it there, stopped up. The burn an indication of stones blooming into calcified flowers that hearken my suffering. Not pain, yet, no, but soon, and for the rest of my shortened lives, until I get the sustenance the organ craves. I embrace myself to hold the pain at bay, and try to walk like nothing is wrong, even though everything is always. Mr. Crispy's Telecommunications Portal is brought to you by Jolly & Sons Antacid Tablets. Did you consume a gluttonous amount of mustard trifle? Are you racked with ailments of the intestine? Has the stress of the modern world left your psychology taxed and your stomach ulcerous? Just 2 of Jolly & Sons Antacid Tablets, taken an hour before dawn, will leave your system lubricated and feeling just fine. Do not exceed 2 tablets in a 24-hour period, as they will summon beings eldritch, which will leave your colon bloodied and exhausted. Do not combine Jolly & Sons Antacid Tablets with Puree's antibacterial ointment, no matter what the bleached squirrel skull on your mantle tells you. Jolly & Sons Antacid Tablets are available only at Wheatland Organic Market in the medicine aisle. And now for your holiday table, Mr. Crispy's Mustard Trifle. Mama Crispy couldn't keep the casserole dish full enough for us recalcitrant children. 9, not including the stillborn septuplets that still reside on the mantle all these years later. How she sweated and toiled in the kitchen to make this wonderful concoction. 10 ounces each of French's yellow mustard, Grey Poupon stone ground Dijon, Hellman's brown mustard, Johnny's sweet and spicy mustard plugs, and Num Brothers Szechuan mustard. 5 heaping tablespoons of Coleman's English mustard powder, 2 cups pureed carrot, 1 full horseradish root julienne, 5 cups of sugar, 1 bag of Kraft baby marshmallows, 2 Vidalia onions, 1 large bag of horse bones, 3 Florida salmon or 6 cans of B+ grated canned tuna, 3 cups of sourdough crumbs, and 4 pounds extra sharp cheddar cheese shredded. That's all. Preheat your oven to 350 degrees centigrade. While the oven preheats, shred the cheese into pieces not exceeding a 1/4 inch of thickness and a length of at least 3 inches. Blitz the horse bones in your immersion blender. Larger pieces can be used as a garnish. Roughly chop the onions so that they are larger than the largest piece of cheese, but smaller than the largest horse bone. Use a ruler or tape measure as needed. In the same blender you used for the horse bones, pulse the carrots until pureed. By now, the oven should be preheated, but wait an hour just in case. Drink a fine libation. In a greased casserole, pass the sourdough crumbs into the bottom firmly. Sit in it if you're bathed and your casserole can accommodate you. Spread the carrots with a spatula, then use the spatula to scrape any leftover sourdough crumbs off your butt. Liberally apply the fish on top of the carrots, making an adequate flag pattern symbolizing the rise of the crab and the mantis. Add a layer of horseradish, spicy. Add a layer of cheese. Alternate Kraft baby marshmallows with the onion to create a lovely mosaic. In a bowl, carefully stir all of the prepared mustards together until they resemble a roiling brown and yellow sea. Pour this beautiful concoction over the casserole, retaining that lovely yellow and brown swirl. Sprinkle any remaining bones, cheese, and the mustard powder and sugar on top. Put the whole damn thing in your stinking hot oven. Bake for 3 hours or until the top is golden brown and crispy to the touch. Serving suggestion: place in a rhombus-shaped dish with crackers, bread, or other plain consumable. Best enjoyed piping hot. Last evening's snowfall made the land look like pristine paper, and I strode across it, writing a prologue to my revenge in my wake. The deed done, hands vibrating with a joyful palsy, I made to escape the scene of my duty. The sky was clear, and I offered up thanks to my ancient icons who had erased my previous trail, the land unblemished and awaiting my triumphant tale of reprisal in their name. Looking behind me as I walked, I saw the catalog of my actions in crimson footsteps, not unlike the words of the dead Savior in holy books. When I made it to the road, these words too had vanished, hushed and blessed by those same exemplars, even though what was unmade by me could not be unmade by any man or God. The chord roar of the pianoforte shocked the aristocrats into attention. The tech player's plastic flanges a blur as the piece reached its climax. There was a pregnant silence between the coda and the rapturous applause of the audience. Dr. Sanyos, neatly attired in a purple tuxedo with black trim, subtly bowed as he wheeled the tech player off stage. As the assembly chattered about the performance, they were unaware of the smoke whose tendrils rose from the vents and dissipated into the cool night air on deck. They didn't feel the temperature rising from the fire set below deck of the dirigible, nor observe the embers land on the silk cordon and begin to bloom and burn. Lady Drake of Goslingshire was the first to scream, others soon joining in the chorus of terror, but too late to change the fate of the passengers of the simultaneously sinking and scorching HMS Anne Lorraine. One survivor, Duchess Lynn Droth, was left permanently disfigured and disabled, unable to provide authorities with the information necessary to find the notorious Alan Roy, who went on to set numerous other conflagrations until years later, when he was apprehended and imprisoned for his crimes against the gentry.
Thank you for listening to the Get Out of Jail Free Radio Hour podcast. All material in this episode, CRISPY50, was written, performed, recorded, and produced by Matthew Henshaw. More information can be found at linktr.ee/MHENSHAW. Call Mr. Crispy's Telecommunications Portal at 717-347-6712. New messages appear every fortnight. Spread the number far and wide, and let unsuspecting ears have a good time. And now I bid you a restless night. May you cower in the corner until morning's light, and in the harsh daylight you will see no one really gets out of jail free.